Shalom, Israel. It's the scribe back again. All right, this is a quick video. I'm going to show two clips of when Henry Louis Gates Jr. Went to West Africa. The two clips are from when he went to the modern-day country of Benin, but he was going to the Dahomey Empire because the modern-day country of Benin is where the empire of Dahomey was located. They changed the name from Dahomey to Benin, and the actual empire of Benin was in Nigeria. It wasn't in what is called Benin today. But that's just a little bit of background information. Anyways, so he goes there and to find out more information about the slave trade and Africans selling other Africans into slavery. And so I'll let you watch the clips. We'll watch the first clip, and then I'll break it down a little bit. Then we'll watch the second clip, and then I'll break it down. But the gist of this is they teach you that Africans sold other Africans into slavery, and that's false. Africans didn't sell other Africans, into slavery. Africa is a big continent. That's they weren't selling their own people. It was different nations. It was different nations of people selling other nations of people into slavery. And you're going to see that in the video. And essentially what you had Hamites selling Israelites into slavery. It wasn't selling their own people into slavery. It was Hamites selling Israelites into slavery. And so what you're going to see in these clips is you're going to see with the Dahomey, when he's in Dahomey, he's speaking to the king. And these are the Fan people. And the Fan people, and this is where you get the port of Judah that's on the coast of Benin now. And that's where they brought a lot of slaves from the slave coast. And a lot of those slaves were Uwe, or however you pronounce it, is EWE. But the Fan also captured a lot of Yoruba and other groups and sold them into slavery out of that port. A lot of different Israelite groups they sold out of that port. And you're going to see in this video Henry Louis Gates, being a brother, an African American, an Israelite himself. He's traveling to West Africa doing the research, and then he finds out, he's seeing like, oh man, we're not all the same. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. So for all you Pan-African brothers out there, because I meet a lot of them, like, oh, we got to unify with all Africans, or globally all Africans. I'm for unifying, but I'm for unifying with my people, which are the Israelites, which is a lot of the Bantus, the groups that were scattered throughout slavery. Not all Africans. Them Africans that sold you into slavery, they're not your friends. Those are your enemies. That's why they sold you into slavery. But anyways, let's watch the clip, and we'll talk about it, and then you can let me know what you think about it.
Publicly talk about this history of the slave trade when the people of Dahomey sold other black people to the white man and then shipped them to the New World.
We do not talk much about slave trade, slavery, because for most of Beninese people, 300 years back is a lot. Those who have been to school know about slave trade, know about what happened to their brothers sold to the New World. And a few months back, we had the bicentenary of the death of King Agonglo. Mm-hmm. And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade. But of course, he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't trade their own people. Mm-hmm. They would trade people from the wars and battles they did all around the country.
Okay, so if you heard the dude towards the end, he said that of course they knew how bad the slave trade was, and of course they knew how bad slavery was, because they didn't sell that's why they didn't sell their own people. They sold other people. You're hearing it from the horse's mouth. He specifically said, we did not sell our own nation. We sold other people. We knew how bad slavery was. We knew. So this another concept that you'll hear from, especially a lot of Afrocentric Kemetic people of our people who are lost and confused and are on that like Pan-African tip. You'll hear like, oh, they didn't know how bad slavery was, or the Europeans tricked them. All of that is false, dude. Like, they knew how bad slavery was. And they didn't care because they weren't trading their own people into slavery. Okay? Like, we have to wake up as a people. Like, we have to wake up. Okay? And like, there's all kinds of proof of this. There's numerous examples of where people got sold into slavery to the New World by mistake. And you know what happened? Those people, somehow they ended up getting sent back to Africa. Why? Because the chiefs and the kings negotiated for their return. Because they were sent by mistake. So, anyways, so you're seeing Henry Louis Gates went to Dahomey, and the guy he's talking to is a historian from the region. He's one of the people, he does the history for the Dahomey Empire. And he's talking to Henry Louis Gates, and he lets him know, hey, we didn't sell our own people into slavery. We sold other people into slavery. Okay? Now, in this next clip I'm about to play, you're going to see Henry Louis Gates meet the king of the king of Dahomey now. And you can tell, like, you'll see in the video, Henry Louis Gates is a little bit uncomfortable because if you actually watch this documentary, if you want to watch it yourself, it's called The Slave Kingdoms, and it came on PBS. But before this, he was in Ghana, and he met with the Ashantis, and he met with their queen mother, and he had a good time. They welcomed him. He liked it because the Ashanti and the Akan people are actually Israelites. And so he was talking to them about slavery, and they were explaining to him, what went on and all of that and everything with the slave trade and the Ashanti and all of that, and everything was cool. But you're going to see in this next clip, like, he's uncomfortable to talk to the king of Dahomey about the slave trade because he knows that these people are not his people, and he knows that these people sold his people into slavery. And you're going to see it in the clip.
Talk to him about the slave trade. But for some reason, I feel more awkward about it than I did in Ashanti. You tell him my great-great-great-grandmother came from the west coast of Africa. He's very happy to see his friend, his son, who has gone to London or America to be today a very important personality, and he returned to home. Thank you. Almost 20% of all the slaves that came to the New World came from the Bight of Benin, from this very region. And the slave trade here was run by the kings of Dahomey, run far longer than any other aspect of the slave trade, all the way to 1885. So they knew what they were doing. So for me to go to the court of the king of Dahomey, as nice as the people are here, and as much as I enjoyed it, was, for the descendant of one of those slaves, an unsettling experience.
Okay, so there you have it. Before we close out, though, I want to just touch on a couple points that I feel are important for Israelites to keep in mind. If you're an Israelite and you're researching your history, don't jump on the bandwagon just because you read a book and we've already discussed how DNA tests are irrelevant. Sorry to burst your bubble, but check my video I did on the Igbo DNA test, and also the video deals with the Igbo DNA test in the Kenyan elections. Check that video out and just do some of your own research. DNA tests to determine ancestry is completely faulty. It's not reliable. DNA tests are only good for determining who the parent is. If you have the DNA swab from the dad and the child, or are determining in like a murder case per se, if it hasn't been manipulated. But I don't want to get on that. Check the video I did on that. These are facts. Don't rely on a DNA test to determine your ancestry. One of the reasons, though, in that for us as a people, why you shouldn't rely on that, and then just because you read in some book where it says, oh, these people, a lot of Fulani slaves were brought to the New World. The Fulani owned slaves already. And the slaves and I'm just using the Fulani as one example, but this goes across the board with some groups in Africa, like the Fulani and the Hassa. The Fulani and the Hassa didn't sell their people into slavery to the New World or to the Arabs. The Fulani and the Hassa sold other people that they captured, or they sold slaves that they already owned. And the slaves that they already owned, that they sold to other people, were not technically Fulani. Even though, or Hassa, even though they may have been living amongst them, and even though they may have identified as being that, that's because they lived amongst them, and that was the country or area that they lived in. So they just identified with those people because they had been slaves there for so long. The Fulani themselves even know that those people, and like I said, it's not just the Fulani, there's some other groups in West Africa like this too. They knew that those were not actual Fulanis. That's why they had them as slaves. And then they would sell those people to the New World. Okay? So when you get that DNA test done and it's telling you, oh, I got some Fulani in me, like that's not actual Fulani. Okay? Anyways, the other point that I wanted to make was the reason why I say, when I say most Bantus, I never say all Bantus, because it's not all Bantu groups are actually Israelites. The other thing we have to remember, a lot of them are, but some of them are not. Like the people we're covering that in that video, where the people of Dahomey who sold the people into slavery, they're Bantus, they're a part of the Niger Congo group, and they're not Israelites. I gave another example in the video, I think I did part 2 about the Hamites. I talked about how the Efik people in Nigeria sold a lot of Igbos into slavery. The Efik people are not Israelites. They're Bantus, but they're not Israelites. Okay? Just like the Edo people in Nigeria, also heavily involved in the slave trade, sold a lot of Igbos into slavery. They're not Israelites, but they're Bantus. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And the reason being, the thing you have to remember is when the Israelites migrated out of Israel, and some of them, like, and this is documented in the Bible too, as well as in history. There's numerous passages in the Old Testament that tells you that the Israelites migrated into Egypt. And I'm not talking about when, like when Jesus went there to hide, or people going down there to hide individually. I'm talking about mass migration of people going into Egypt. So anyways, when the Israelites went into Egypt, there were Canaanites who went into Egypt too. There were Canaanites who settled in Northwest Africa. That's how you ended up with Carthage, along with Israelites. And this is covered a little bit in part 2 of the Hamite series, part 2, where I deal with the Hamites in that series, and we're going to cover that in the upcoming episodes of that series, the migration patterns. But the point is so you had Canaanites with the Israelites migrating to these different parts of West Africa. And you have to also remember that the Israelites and the Canaanites lived in close conjunction with each other. Even in Israel, you read that in the Bible. Like the Israelites never really kept the commandments. That's why we kept getting sent into slavery. But in that process, a lot of us married Canaanite women. A lot of Israelites, and this is, like I said, documented. Anybody who reads the Old Testament knows this. The Israelites also practiced the Canaanites' religion, most of them, especially the northern kingdom of Samaria or Israel. Judah, the kingdom of Judah, not so much. But overall, a lot of the Israelites practiced the Canaanite religion, intermingled with them. There's a lot of similarities with the Canaanite language and the Hebrew language. So the point is when you look at these groups, of course you're going to have groups in West Africa where it's both groups are Bantu. Both groups' languages seem similar, but both groups are not the same. You see what I'm saying? Because you had Canaanites and Israelites both migrating into West Africa. Along with, you had Egyptians too, who went into Central Africa and East Africa, the ancient Egyptians originally, the original ones coming down from Kemet. And, yeah, but like I said, that's coming up to be covered in more detail. And also there's lots of books been written on that, lots of research done on that. But before we close out, I want to just hit one or two scriptures that kind of deal with this before I close out on what we just watched. If I can find it, I'm turning to Joel. Give me just a second. All right, Joel. I should have it marked in here, but apparently I do not. Hold on. Okay. So I'm starting at Joel chapter 3, And I'm starting at verse 4. And it reads, Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon? Tyre and Zidon are, that's Phoenicia, that's the Canaanites. And the Lord is saying, what do you have to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon? And all the coast of Palestine. Palestine is where you get the Philistines from. That's where the name Palestine comes from, the Philistines. The Philistines were descendants of the Egyptians. I covered that in the part 2, the Hamites in the series. That's listed in the Bible. A lot of the Philistines also migrated into Africa. I can show you that. Okay. Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. So this is saying here, the prophet Joel is saying that the Canaanites and the Philistines sold the Israelites from the kingdom of Judah in slavery to the Grecians. Who are the Grecians? The Europeans. And we've already covered about how the Canaanites migrated into West Africa with the Israelites. Okay? So I'm going to close out there. Hopefully you learned something from this little lesson. And if you have any questions, hit me up.